Even in the bleakest winters of the Great Depression, imagination didn't freeze. A humble board game turned competition into escape. A new kind of film caught the nation's struggle in stunning color, and the refrigerator, cool, humming steady, transformed from a luxury into a symbol of modern survival. In a time of scarcity, creativity thrived and changed the way we live forever. I'm Isaac S. Loftus, joined by Dr. Lynn Robbins, and this is Too Complicated for History.
Today, we are very excited to welcome our guest, Jason Voiovich, who is an innovation historian and a fractional chief marketing officer. And he is also the author of the upcoming book, Bullfrogs, Bingo, and the Little House on the Prairie: How Innovators of the Great Depression Made the Best of the Worst of Times. Thanks so much for being here with us today, Jason.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Isaac. I am really excited to be here and talk about this book.
And I will apologize for the truck backing up outside of my house, but I have a lot of questions about your title. I understand how the word historian works in that sentence, but that's about it. Because I've never heard of an innovation historian. I'm intrigued about that. But also, before we even get into the history stuff and your book, what is a fractional chief marketing officer?
That's a really good question. Part of it is that, what I do for a living, I wish that history paid the bills. I think maybe we all do. But we live in the real world of real constraints. And what I do for a living is I help several companies bring new products and services to market. So, what fractional means is that I am working part-time with several different companies, not just working at the R&D department of 3M or of Procter & Gamble or something like that. Mostly I'm helping inventors and innovators and entrepreneurs and those sort of folks who are, whether they're independent or whether they're small organizations, kind of get the idea out of their head and into the market. And, from my perspective, being an innovation historian helps me kind of take advantage of that collective experience to help my clients, repeat their success. What's that, Santanaya's famous quote, those who fail to study history are doomed to repeat it. I flip that on its head for my clients. Those who study innovation history have the opportunity to repeat those successes. Nice. So that's kind of my unique point of difference that I can bring as a person that will help you accelerate and give you a better chance of success in the market. It's hard enough out there. So if I can make it a little easier, or something we can learn from history makes that process a bit better or go faster or help you avoid driving into the ditch, that's the idea.
So if any of our listeners have the idea for the next Scrub Daddy or something like that,
Yes, the Flowbee. I mean, there are all kinds of things. I have worked on just about everything. I've worked on cheese, different types of non-dairy cheese. I've worked on reproductive aids for cows. That's a neat story in and of itself. So when you think like, is any idea too weird out there? Lots of people are talking about the new thing they can do with AI. Like, hold my beer. I got some fun ones.
I have some questions about the cow devices, but we may save that for a Patreon exclusive, because I'm not sure if it's YouTube appropriate.
It is. I will tell you, it's family friendly. Okay. It's not like what you think, but it is really interesting that so much of innovation and innovation history is, the story of everyday people, understanding a particular problem and creating something to fix it, and actually learning about how that process really works, kind of the primary sources of history, and really going back. And what's so wonderful about that kind of print era that we used to live in, especially in the eras that I study, is that people kept notes. They kept diaries, they kept journals. And to read through someone like Richard Drew's diaries, he's the person who invented masking tape and Scotch tape at 3M. Going through 3M's archives and actually reading his words and reading like what things he was trying and what things weren't working and how he struggled through it. When my clients come to me and they're frustrated and they're just down on themselves, I'll pull out one of those primary source documents and say, hey, this is the person who invented the pacemaker, and look at how hard it was for him.
Oh, that's very
Like,
cool.
you'll be okay. Keep
Yeah.
at it. Everything's going to be all right. I think that's the wonderful thing about history, really, and both of you know this, is when you actually look at the primary source documents and you go and you really study history, not just the histories written after the fact,
Mhm.
you really learn that history is human, it's messy, it's not linear, not everything kind of lines up. And that's kind of my issue, and why I focus so much on innovation history is I want people to see that process, because when you see, oh, look here, Steve Jobs created the iPhone and look at how great it is. And
Mhm.
there's no way I could be anything like that because he's Steve Jobs and that's the iPhone. And gosh, they feel intimidated even to start. Like, no, it's not like that. And I want to show people what history in innovation really is, not what the stories we tell ourselves are.
Hmm. Yeah, that actually touches on a concept that we've talked about before on the show, in the difference between history and memory, right?
Mm.
Like memory is that collective myth of like Steve Jobs, and of all of these folks, of like McDonald's, but the actual hit, like you said, is much more messy and more human. Um, and I
Right. And it,
love, yeah, go ahead, Lynn. Sorry.
oh, I was, you go ahead, Isaac, because I have my next question is about another word in his title. So you go ahead and.
Yeah, we might as well talk about the contents of the book at some point, right?
That we'll get to
Um,
that.
so I read the introduction to your book, and I thought it was wonderfully personal. I don't remember a specific time that I went to church bingo with my Catholic grandmother. One of my grandmothers is Catholic, but I definitely have.
Many and
Um,
all. If you grew up Catholic, you went to bingo with grandma. That's
yeah,
just a story we all have.
it's a thing. And it actually put into context a bunch of stories that I heard my father talking about in how they did stuff around the house growing up. Like his grandmother made cotton balls. Like they didn't have, they wouldn't buy the pre-balled cotton. They would buy a ball, like a big bundle of cotton, and then
Huh.
his grandmother would separate it out into individual balls for them to use for make for him and her and his mom to use for makeup and stuff like that. But you talked about penny pinching and saving and thriftiness and anyway, I want you to talk a little bit about your book and just explain to our audience what it is and what you're writing about. But I thought it was wonderful, and it's a great. At the end of it, you said we need to be listening, and I'm really excited to listen today.
No, that's wonderful. The book is personal, and it's part of how they're part of it's stylistic. This is, I am writing for people who are, you know, not just curious people, but people who really do want to apply these lessons to their own kind of innovation ideas. And I truly believe the world needs more creativity. It needs more innovation. We need all the help we can get. And I want to show people that. And it's on my mission to do that. But I know that many of those people would be really intimidated by a David McCullough and picking up, the 1,000-page Truman biography. That just wouldn't be something they would crack open. So I wanted to take more of like a tapas history approach, where
Sure.
I'm creating kind of a flavor experience and I'm giving you just enough of the stories to help you understand what was going on. And kind of weaving back to both the primary sources and the other histories. If you're really interested in learning more about Pancho Barnes, for instance, I want to give you the chances to go and see and kind of honor the work that has been done and kind of the deep work that has been done and let you go find that yourself. But I do know that attention spans are short. Like my chapters are listened to about 28 to 32 minutes, which is just about the amount of time you're going to spend on the treadmill. That's no accident.
Smart.
It's meant to do that so that the average person can say, oh, got it. That's interesting. That's not quite like The Food That Built America or something like
Mhm.
that. That's a little deeper and better than that. But
Mhm.
it's not something where I feel like I need to crack open this 1,000-page tome and kind of sift through kind of academic, kind of the academic jargon and the historiography. Those are all great. I enjoy that. I understand though that my audience may not enjoy that, so I need to tell those stories differently. And I know as a marketing person that I can generate that kind of empathy by sharing upfront and kind of getting people emotionally invested in the characters and in the story. And for that, I credit mostly reading fiction and romance and those sorts of things for helping. They are good storytellers. And I think that nonfiction writers can learn a lot from mystery, romance, sci-fi, those sort of genres that help pull people in and really create that kind of experience. I want to do that with nonfiction, and I'm not saying that I'm the only one who does that. There are great nonfiction writers out there who really do an excellent job at that. One in particular that I cite in the book is, uh, Scarface and the Untouchable. It's a story about Elliot Ness and Al Capone,
Mhm.
written by a historian and a novelist, and it is excellent. It is exactly this type of new genre. So, yeah, that's. I didn't really answer your question, Isaac, on what the heck is the book about. I promised to do that though. Okay, the 30 seconds on that. The book is 21 stories of how everyday people turned lemons into lemonade. And it wasn't just that they survived hardships or that they pinched pennies or those. They certainly did that. Okay, everybody did that during that time. But they created kind of the products, the services, the entertainment, a lot of the ideas that we still really enjoy today. And although it was a painful period in economic life, the Great Depression dramatically accelerated innovation. In short, I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. And that was absolutely true during that time. And it was one of the worst economic periods in our history. And it was the most innovative period in our history out of sheer Darwinian necessity. That's what the whole book is about.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I want to go back and sort of set the groundwork a little bit more because I don't want to assume hopefully, we have young viewers who, have no connection to this era in history. So if you could just explain uh, your time period, the Great Depression, why it was great, and the years that encompass.
No,
And I mean, great doesn't have to mean good. So, why
yeah,
it's the Great Depression.
yeah. When you study, like half of my family is Spanish by way of Cuba and Barcelona. And in Spanish, there are two different words for that. There's great and great. There's actually a separate word for great as in awesome and
Mhm,
great as in wow, that is big and exciting and everything.
mhm.
We're talking about the second one. Great as in big deal. Uh, what we're looking at is roughly the 1930s. It's actually pretty good in there. It's a pretty good lineup because most people chart the beginning of the Great Depression, although no one thought of it that way at the time. The stock market crash, October 20th, 1929. So most people do that, and that's basically a couple of months ahead of the end of the year. So you got November and December. Uh, and then taking us to pretty much what most people call the end of that, at least symbolically, when the whole mood changed, was the invasion of Poland in 1939. So, yes, there is a little bit of bleed over. You could say, well, did the Great Depression really start with the Florida land bubble in 1925, 26? And did it really not end until 1945 or 44 or 45? It, the historians can debate that one. I am taking it, really, it lines up so nicely with 1930 to 1939 that's what those are the dates. Uh, okay, so what makes it great? And that's the part that's really tough to get your arms around because there had been plenty of economic turmoil before then. I think for most younger viewers, their most recent point of reference is the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, 2009, where uh, hold our collective beer, our grandparents said. That not even close. We have had nothing like that in the late, the early 2000s, the 1980s, the 1970s were nothing like that at all. Before the 1930s, we used to call those things panics. We had the
Mm.
panic of this and the panic of that. There's actually a really big, mini depression in early 1920s, right after World War One and everyone coming back. Big deal in 1925 with the Florida land bubble. What made this different, though, was this confluence of a lot of different things at the same time. Yes, you had the stock market that crashed and the resulting capital crunch. Most people just don't understand kind of what Wall Street really does. And what Wall Street does, in short, is it funnels money to companies that are going to make the best use of it. And it takes money away from companies that don't. That is all Wall Street does at a really simple level. And if you don't have capital, even good companies can't get the money they need to invest. They can't buy equipment, they can't hire workers, they can't expand. So you're not just starving out the bad ones, you're starving out good companies as well. So when companies can't afford to invest, they can't hire. When people can't hire, people lose their jobs. When people lose their jobs, they stop investing. It's a vicious cycle that continues. So Wall Street really does have a purpose. Not saying that they always do their job well, but they do have a purpose. So you had up to 25% unemployment. So 1 in 4 people at its peak in 1933 were out of work. That undercounts. And the reason it undercounts is we are talking about a much smaller labor pool. Most women did not participate in the labor force at that time. And it doesn't count how many people were underemployed. The best estimates we have, and they're not great, are that up to 50% of the entire workforce was either unemployed or underemployed at that time. That's half. That's not like, hey, when your neighbor loses a job, it's a recession. When you lose a job, it's a depression. This is the collective freak out was insane. We had at the same time we had uh, we had problems with agriculture. Most people remember the Dust Bowl, or they've heard of it. They've read Steinbeck's novel, The Grapes of Wrath. Uh, we had the reason that happened. Generally, there were some atmospheric things going on, but the big thing was that this is the first time most people think about the Model T and its impact on cars and trucks, and like, hey, we're driving around cars. People forget that the biggest single impact was the tractor. So we could plow the field, and we could agriculturate it to an extent we never could before, and we had no clue what was going on, and we screwed up big time, and basically huge amounts of topsoil simply blew away. So we had that caused mass migrations. Add to that tariffs, the Smoot-Hawley Act, huge tariffs. Add to that unforced errors with the Federal Reserve, where kind of our banking system was just becoming more global and more sophisticated. Back in 1921, JP Morgan basically wrote a check that fixed it. He couldn't do that in the early 1930s. So we had this confluence of things that came together at that same time. And, what that meant, not just kind of economically or culturally or for migrations or people in the workforce and all of these changes, we had all the changes of the 1920s, all the technology, and you have this thing, everything was crashing down around you. The biggest thing, what made the Great Depression great, was the psychology. Like, people felt it. Great Depression is, think about it, it is a mass psychological depression. So you can't write a book like this. Underpinning every chapter in the book is what was inside people's heads. And I take pains in every chapter to help remind people, like, what was it like to be, like, not just, worried about, like, oh, well, maybe will things be a little bit better than they are today? How's my 401k going to do? It's will we have enough to eat tomorrow? Will we starve to death? Like, that's something that just, that creeping terror that that builds over time is for people who don't really, especially for Gen Z folks, even millennials, you just, without your grandparents there to really tell you it is very difficult to understand what that was like to live through it. And I think it is important for us to do that, to help us understand not just like, hey, how could we handle that if that happened again? But like, hey, we're made of tough stuff. We can handle that.
Right.
Like it's, what? There are issues today, no doubt. But we got this. We got through the last one. We'll get through this one. That was a long, Lynn, that was a long, long example.
But that
That's
it was a great explanation because the psychology is what really fascinated me. And one of the things I came to your book thinking it's the Great Depression, people are losing their jobs, nobody's spending money because they don't have any money. But what your book shows is that there was still spending, but the spending habits changed with an eye toward saving money. And so to talk about one of the inventions, because I love all of the ones in the book, but you were talking about the refrigerator.
Yeah, the
And
refrigerator is crazy. Yeah, that's
yeah,
what
tell
a
us about
crazy
that because to
story.
me, it went from, I mean, I do early America history, so I think of the ice house. So there's a really deep hole in the ground, and then we have refrigerators. Right? It was just smooth transition. But if you could tell us how that tied into this time in history.
Yeah, it's funny that refrigerators were invented in the 1920s. So they were one of the many inventions that came out, but they were expensive and they didn't really catch on. And it would be one of those things, if you had to guess, is the refrigerator going to catch on of all things? This an average refrigerator in the early to mid 1930s cost about $3,000 adjusted for inflation.
Okay.
So this is a big deal. Imagine
Yeah.
you're out of work, you're underemployed, whatever, you don't know where your next meal is coming from. You're popping down $3,000 to get a refrigerator. Yet people did in huge numbers. Adoption went from the teens to the high 60s in terms of percentage of homes that had at least one refrigerator.
Wow.
And it's kind of like, well, what on earth? Why on earth would people spend on that? If you think about it the other way, what does a refrigerator allow you to do? Think about not having one, for instance. Okay, well, like it's so odd for us to even think about. Well, of course you have a refrigerator. Every apartment in the
Yeah.
United States has to have a refrigerator. You can't rent an apartment without having a refrigerator in it. And think about it. I could preserve food. I could keep milk cold. I could keep meats. If I found a good deal and like, hey, I was out and I went fishing and I caught 3 muskies, I could put them in the freezer and I could save them for later. Well, think
Right.
about that. Like if you caught 3 muskies before and you didn't have a refrigerator, you either needed to eat them right away. Maybe you had to dry them, smoke them, kind of create jerky out of them. That's hard. Most people were like moving into cities. So that wasn't really feasible. You needed a way to kind of keep food for like, hey, I got a good deal and I can keep them there. And if I prepared a meal and we didn't eat all of it, I could put the rest in the refrigerator. I wouldn't waste it. This was all about waste. Today, most people don't understand that about 40 to 50% of all food that we use in the United States goes in the garbage. That blows people away. I actually studied this years ago, strawberries specifically. Do you want to guess if you had 100 strawberries that you picked, how many actually were consumed? You want to take a guess on that one? Isaac, what do you think? What do you
Well,
think the
based on,
number
so I have a
is?
2-year-old son who loves strawberries, so we buy them a lot. They're incredibly expensive, and my
Yes.
guess is like 1%, based on
Yeah.
how often I throw away half a carton of strawberries because they've gotten moldy.
And that's with the
That's
refrigerator.
when that's
I
with a
have that
refrigerator.
issue.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Lynn, what do you think? What do you think the number is?
How many are actually consumed? I will say 30%.
Yeah. The number is kind of between there. The number is 7.
Whoa.
I
7 are consumed for every 100 that are picked.
That's
It-
absurd
it-
and
Wow.
upsetting. And
so right. I mean, that's if when we think about, well, people are going hungry, well, we can either produce more food, which we are very, very good at, by the way,
Hmm.
or we can be just waste less. And that's
Right.
really one of the key lessons that our grandparents, and maybe as a Gen Z person, your great grandparents would be there to teach you, is don't waste. That's why they invested in a refrigerator. Because think about it, there's kind of a rational side to think about that and an emotional way to think about that. The rational side is, okay, there's an ROI on this. I know that how many meals do I have to throw out in order for me to make that monthly payment? Okay, so there's an ROI going on there, and the answer is not many.
Mhm.
But the emotional way is, think about this kind of psychological uncertainty that people are facing during the Great Depression. You're freaking out. There are Hoovervilles, FDR is talking about fear itself, and people are afraid. They're very, very afraid. Lots of stuff's going on. Everything feels like it's falling apart. I buy a refrigerator. A refrigerator feels like I'm taking charge.
Right.
I'm doing something. I'm making this investment, and I'm going to be okay. That's how people are thinking about it. So yeah, as food got more expensive and some food got really cheap, weird era, it allowed you to make that investment. And most people, as a marketing person, I know most people will make a decision emotionally and then justify it later with facts.
Sure.
Right.
So it was an emotional decision. It felt like it was empowering to buy a refrigerator, and that's why people did it. And the numbers bear that out. Millions of people bought them during the Great Depression. So many, in fact, that manufacturers were getting. I don't know if any of you have seen refrigerators with like touch screens and music and all that stuff that
Yes.
are in there. That is not a new idea. During the Great Depression, in the Sears catalogs, and some of the primary sources are wonderful, by the way, for this, old ads where you can see there's a radio embedded in the refrigerator. Like one of those old radios is in where the freezer should be. And, there's a picture of a woman there,
Like
just kind of
tuning it?
smiling and turning on the radio so she can listen while she's preparing meals. It's just like, oh, isn't that ridiculous? Until you look at the refrigerator that has like,
TikTok on the front of it.
That has, you can watch your TikTok videos while you're looking at food, so, everything old is new again.
That's amazing. By the way, this is an entire aside, but it reminds me when you talked about not wasting. This is something. So my grandfather was a child of the Depression, so his parents were the ones that were living through it. But he clearly inherited some of their quirks. I used to absentmindedly press a button on the remote control when the TV wasn't on, like when I was just playing it, whatever. And he always had that the button only has a certain amount of clicks or something like that. Right? Stop pressing the button. Right? Because it will only work so many times, and every time you do it and you're not actually doing the thing, that's one less time it'll actually. And it always struck me so bizarre, but it does feel like it is in line with the way. Don't break it early if you don't have to break it, because he's not wrong. That it would eventually
he's not
wear
wrong.
out.
I mean, from an engineering perspective, all of those.
He was an engineer as well, so
all of those buttons have they are tested for a certain number of when they make cars, they've got a little machine that puts a butt in a seat thousands of times. It's the funniest thing if you've ever seen. Find a TikTok video of this thing. It is really hysterical. But they're rated for a certain number. There's a specification on how many butts can go into the car before
the springs wear out.
Well, how many times there's a spec for everything. This one of the things that people don't understand about engineering is talk to an engineer. They will tell you, like, oh, I'm an automotive engineer. There is a specification for how many times the door can be opened and closed before it will fail. And it has to meet or exceed that specification, and it is designed for that. So it's all kinds of things like that. You think like, well, who pays attention to this stuff? Everything you sit in, everything you interact with has a specification that someone had to work through trial and error to get this thing right. So have a little bit more patience with ChatGPT when it hallucinates. It's a long history of things that just need to get worked out.
But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to distract us, but it was just another thing. I was like, oh wait, I'm sure there'll be more throughout this conversation.
It's totally in the zeitgeist of the whole thing where like waste not, want not, wear out, don't rust out. Like all of those sayings come from that era.
Yeah.
And for someone like me who grew up kind of really idolizing his grandparents, uh, that stuck. And those sort of lessons stick. I have those little, I don't know if I have any right now. I still have those penny rolls. Like my grandfather used to put a bucket of pennies in front of me and have me put 50 pennies in one little roll and
Yeah.
roll it up and then take it to the bank.
The little brown paper ones. Yeah.
The little, and there were quarter ones and there were dime ones and nickel ones. So they talk about like, oh, we want to get rid of the penny. Like, I don't want to get rid of the penny. I have a kind of an emotional attachment to the penny.
For our younger viewers, pennies, quarters, and nickels are physical money.
Yeah.
They're made of metal. You may have never seen this before if you've only
them
ever used Venmo or Apple Pay to pay for things.
Right.
You know what is funny, Isaac? I mean, speaking of that, there's a chapter in the book on color photography. And there's a spot in there where I spend about, I don't know, maybe 300 to 500 words explaining what a camera is. This is a camera. It is a dedicated device that you carried around, that it only did that. It only did that one thing. Right. And worse, you had to feed it with this stuff called film. And you could only take so many pictures. And you didn't know when you took a picture, you had no idea if that, like what that picture looked like until you took the film out of the camera, you put it in a little container, you took it to Walgreens and you left it there for a week. And then you got your pictures back. And then and only then do you realize that you had the lens cap on the whole time.
Oh,
the good old
future
days.
generations will never know the pain. That was the whole 5th birthday party? That's all we got, huh?
Yeah.
Or you know what, though?
We have our memories.
It'll all be retro. They're like, oh, I've got a camera. Like 50 years from now, they'll all be kind of carrying around these bulky cameras and snapping. And it just like vinyl, it'll come back.
That's an interesting... So I always assumed that some of the changes that took place in society, and you referenced this a little bit in the book, came from like the pain, right, of this. And obviously that drives you, at a certain level. But I think what you sort of described with the refrigerator being, a very expensive thing, was that there's opportunity for innovation because of change. Right. As opposed to because it was difficult. It's just that it changed the way things worked. And that's where like there were opportunities to really find new ideas that solve new problems.
I think what's interesting is that, yes, it was a painful period, and periods like that tend to catalyze innovation. And the question really becomes, why is that psychologically? What is it about that at a really base level that makes that possible? And the best research we have, and just intuition of just seeing it enough times, is that when it almost like when things are bad or when things change, it gives you a license to look at things differently. How many things changed during the COVID pandemic that were kind of calcified before? Like, well, that's just the way we did things. And now you have this period that kind of upended all that. And it gives you like a license. You're free to look at the same thing again from a new perspective. You think, why on earth did we do it that way? That seems dumb. Like I for instance, I spent most of my adult life living in Minnesota. And if for those of you who don't know where Minnesota is, you're not alone. Look at a map of the United States, point up at the top. There's a little pointy end at the top. That's where Minnesota is. It's cold there. And it will snow, and it will snow violently and a lot at certain times. Yet you still have to get to work. And people would get in their cars and literally it would take 2 or 3 hours to drive 5 miles. And you'd be in your car the whole way, and you'd be driving, it'd be dangerous, and people would spin out and freeze, and it was terrible. And we get to the COVID pandemic, and everyone in Minneapolis said, wait a second, I'm not driving through that anymore, ever again, never. Like, we're doing Zoom. So if there's a snowstorm, we're not going in. And what was interesting is, now that I live in Florida, I have a little bit of a bird's eye view of, this last winter in Minnesota, and I still have my subscription to the Minnesota Star Tribune, or whatever they call themselves now. I think they changed their name. And they said, the schools just went virtual. hey, it got cold, it was 20 below. They said, nope, we're pulling the plug on virtual. We're not having kids stand outside anymore. That's dumb. Why'd we do that?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're talking about. That
Mhm.
during times of stress and times of change, that's what I want people to take away from the book, because a lot of people are really stressed out right now, and they're nervous and they're terrified. What I want to tell them is, yes, you're not wrong to feel that, but there's another way to look at it. Like,
Mhm.
it will give us the opportunity to look at old, calcified, broken things and say, why do we do that anymore? Let's do something different. There's finally an opportunity to do that and take advantage of it, because it doesn't last forever. If it's bad, take advantage. It's what did who was it? Who was the never waste a good crisis?
Right.
What was his name?
Right.
There's a listener who knows who I'm talking about. He was from
Yes.
Illinois. I'll remember it later and I'll break in and say it, but I'll try to be unobtrusive.
There's another historical analogy. Also don't remember where it's from, and I'm sure it's incorrect. But it was say something along the lines of that. Our producer saying it's Rahm Emanuel.
Rama, man, there it is.
Yeah, there it is.
Thank
All right,
you.
Pat.
Oh, Rahm. I haven't thought of him in a while.
Blast from the past. That is.
But the saying, I'm sure it's from some movie or something like that. But that Italy had 500 years of war and gave us the Renaissance, and during that same period, Switzerland had 500 years of peace and gave us the cuckoo clock. Right, like those are the two.
and to be fair, really good chocolate.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, let's not undersell cuckoo clocks and
in-
chocolate.
In skiing, they did okay with skiing. There were a few things. I don't think
stuff. Right.
There was some stuff, but come on, does that compare to gelato and Da Vinci? Probably not.
I'm not quite sure.
While you're eating chocolate, sure.
But Lynn, I know you were really interested when we were chatting ahead of time, prepping this, the photography and stuff, and some of the different.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated. I love photography, but I'm also fascinated with the idea of truth and the belief that a photograph is the truth, because it's in theory, a reflection of reality. But we know you can change, and I'm not talking about Photoshop. It's
Right.
the angle you take, where you place items. It's not necessarily the truth as perhaps they believed it, or as we believe it. Everything is different now. This is pre-Photoshop. And this invention of color photography, I think Kodachrome, Kodak, it changed how people viewed, I don't know if it's history or it viewed their world. And obviously they're already changing that. But I'm interested in how color changed their perceptions, because was this you, Isaac? Isaac likes to say that before photography,
There's a reason I'm wearing the Lord of the Rings shirt today. It's because of
right,
that.
before photography, George Washington could be as old as BC, because it's all
Yeah, it's like almost like our
just
collective mind can't comprehend the pre-photography world because there's no photos
right,
of it, that it might as well be Lord of the Rings.
right,
That it is all fantasy because it's all conjured in our minds, as opposed to seeing a picture of someone. But obviously, color takes that to a whole new level.
right. I think anyone who has, again, this is aging ourselves, but who has seen, was it the Wizard of, or no, the Wizard of Oz was always in color, but maybe a Jimmy Stewart movie that was always in
But
black and white, and then
the
they
beginning of the Wizard
colorized
of Oz
it.
is not in color, right? They do that whole reveal when she gets to Oz.
Right, and even that just shows you the world looks so much different in color than it did in black and white.
Isn't it
So
funny?
yeah,
It's one of those things that you sort of have to explain to little kids. That,
right,
like, hey, okay, how many times have you? I remember I struggled with this a little bit in grade school. You thought, okay, before like 1900, was everything just black and white?
Right.
Like,
right,
when did the world become color? Like, it was funny, because there was this whole era of drawings and paintings, and then you had this era of photography, which is all black and white. And then
hmm
you had an era of color after that, and kind of oversaturated color at that,
oh
because
yeah,
color wasn't as good. Uh, it's interesting that people really from 1900 on, uh, that when you think about the Great Depression, you would think, okay, well, the investment and what people would spend on all things would drop. Photography bucked that trend. People spent more money on photography in the 1930s, and especially once color film was introduced in the mid 1930s, people went wild for it. And uh, why was that really? I mean, that's really the question. Just a number of different things. Physiologically, and I didn't want to get into too much of this in the book, but physiologically, a huge chunk of the human brain is dedicated to image processing.
Mhm.
When you think about, and the biggest way to think about that is, okay, when you're driving down the road and you have your dog in the car and the dog is sticking their head out the window, what are you thinking? Like, oh, he wants to look out the window. No, he wants to smell out the window, because the dog's brain is wired differently. It is wired as much for smell as ours is for sight. They actually don't see that well. We see lots better than dogs do, but they smell a lot better than we do. Sometimes, if you leave the dog out in the mud, they don't smell as good, but you get the idea. So, photography is one of those things that it just immediately appeals. And if you've got a smartphone, these are basically smart cameras with everything else tacked on. When you look at what people use of them, they're mostly cameras. That was really what the smartphone really did. So, but that's just behavior. That doesn't really answer why. Uh, the best, the best evidence we have says that people wanted to use photography to create and document their reality. They wanted to capture, they wanted to preserve something about themselves. And this goes way back to writing, right? That writing was a form of immortality. A photo is a form of immortality. A photo captures a moment in time, and it proves you were there. It proves that this thing happened. How many times have you been over to a grandparent's house, and what do they want to do? They want to look at
Take
photos.
Photos.
They want to kind of step through that process, right? I mean, it's the validation and the celebration of memory and identity, and it creates who we were. That, like, hey, your grandma might be 80 years old now, but when she was 17, grandma was hot. Just think, it's those sort of things where, like, for instance, and I've seen photos of, my parents and grandparents and great grandparents, when they were my age. It's really funny to see, like, oh my God, I look like grandpa. Like, we
Right.
could have,
Yeah.
like, he could have passed for me. And it just puts you in that time and place in a way that a story, kind of oral tradition, doesn't.
Hmm.
And writing does, but you have to create that in your mind. A photograph just is at that next level of that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's surprising at all that people adopted photography like they did, and especially color photography. And if you think about The Wizard of Oz is a great example, Snow White is another one. But you know, Snow White was one of the first times in film where color was used strategically, and not the modern adaptation. Even though they tried to use some of that same idea in there in the film, and this will be interesting for your listeners to go back and watch it again. Watch the 1937 version. The backgrounds used muted colors, kind of full color, but they're a little bit more muted. But when you look at Snow White or you look at the apple, those are oversaturated, like over bright colors. And what Disney was doing is he was telling you where to focus your attention by using intensity of color as a communication tool. And the easiest one is, well, what are ruby red slippers if they're not ruby red? It draws the eye. It is a way. It was a tool for filmmakers and artists to go ahead and communicate things and use it as a storytelling tool in a way that they had never done before. And it just really exploded what people could do, the creativity. It was, people wanted entertainment during the Great Depression, and any new way to get people to spend money to go to the theater, people were going to use. So it wasn't just that people took color photos, but filmmakers were using color. That was actually the first application of Kodachrome was in film, was professional film, professional movie film, and then the commercial film for everyday people came out a year later.
I think that it's such an interesting the want to document is such an interesting thing. I know that there was a program. It expanded even beyond just the personal and even the economic. Because I know that the government had a program where they sent out photographers to go document the Dust Bowl.
Oh yeah,
which I haven't looked too much into it, but like I couldn't wrap my head around why. Like, why would you want to take pictures of like this horrible tragedy and human and like level of human suffering that's taking place in your own country? Like, and the government's like, yes, we need to go send photographers to go out there and make sure that everyone it's preserved.
To bear witness, kind of the journalistic ideal for sure. A lot of the people in FDR's kind of brain trust were journalists and kind of academics of that type. So that kind of research and documentation was a big deal. But to kind of validate those experiences, it was all about putting people to work, by the way. You had a lot of out of work writers, photographers, like a lot of people were out of work. So they would put people to work actually capturing those stories. The most interesting ones, yes, they documented, the Dust Bowl. They documented the famous photos that we've seen of the Dust Bowl all come from that era. But I think what's more important kind of culturally for us is that those people went to the Deep South and they captured the experiences of formerly enslaved people and documented them live before the people passed away. So the reason we know so much about the slavery era in the United States, the Reconstruction era, antebellum South, is because of those stories and that time spoken by the people who lived through them. And interestingly, there's plenty of documentation, and it's, again, one of those primary sources. To read them is to, in one way, validate kind of the narratives that have been passed down to us, and in others, very much challenge them. Those primary sources are fascinating to read and well worth the time and the experience to go through and do that. But yeah, it was all about putting people to work. That simple. So some people built parks, some people built dams, some people ran cable, ran telephone lines out to rural areas. But if you were a writer or a photographer, you might be sent out to Oklahoma to basically take a photo of a wall of earth a mile high. Hey, that's an experience you probably wouldn't soon forget either way.
And thank goodness for them.
Thank goodness for them. Yeah, that's it's one of those things where we forget sometimes that, as someone who looks at not just primary sources from a historical perspective, but someone who looks at from a marketing perspective, I'm looking for census data. I'm looking for where people live. I'm looking for income levels. I'm looking for all that. The government captures all that. It's free. You just have to go look for it. Right. So there is a ton of that information that is captured and cataloged and stored. It's just a matter of how do we process it, access it, use it. It's one of the main promises of artificial intelligence is to go back and look at these massive data sets that just it would take humans decades to figure out. They're all sitting there, thanks to in large part, and thanks to this era in the Great Depression.
So I really want to talk about the game Monopoly, and I will admit, I never played it. I was just never interested in. I just never was interested in playing it.
You've never played Monopoly.
I've never played it. First of all, it would take people hours. I'm not okay with a board game that takes that long, and I just refuse to play. I now feel bad about that after reading your chapter on it because it sounds more fun than I realized. But I also I honestly didn't know what it was about, the purpose of it. But as you described it, it's pretty much to put everyone else in the game bankrupt.
Oh yeah,
and this was popular during the Great Depression. When you think my assumption would be you don't want to be one of those, I don't know, JP Morgan, robber barons, whatever, that you wouldn't find joy in putting other people into bankruptcy.
You wouldn't find joy in other people's misery.
Wrong.
Yeah,
clearly I was wrong, and now I just want to know more about where Monopoly came from. And
Lynn, your question is completely valid, and Jason, I'm sorry for pausing it, but for audio-only listeners, I am aghast.
I knew that was going to do it.
Lynn,
I knew.
This might be the strangest thing about you. I don't know
And there's a
single
lot of
other
strange things
human
about me.
being, a single other human being that has never played a game of Monopoly.
Well, I really hope when this goes on YouTube that people are going to comment and show that I am not the only person
Yeah,
on the planet
if
who
you've
has
never
not
played
played
Monopoly, comment below so Lynn feels less alone.
Yeah,
And if this gets
that's not where I thought that question was going to go.
if this gets 100 likes, we will live stream us playing a game of Monopoly.
Yes, my first game of Monopoly. Yes.
But Jason, sorry.
No, that's
I couldn't let that go. But yes,
no,
influenza, yeah.
I didn't know where to start. Okay, for younger viewers, it's the same reason people play Cards Against Humanity or that like Exploding Kittens game. It's people just there's kind of that kind of dark humor sort of aspect to the whole thing. People loved that sort of thing. It was empowering. It was just like buying a refrigerator.
Mm-hmm.
You played that game and you crushed somebody into oblivion. You knew it was like, hey, we all know what's going on outside, but this is a way to kind of have fun with it. And we're taking power over it by making a joke of it. It's a very common human response to the whole thing. But that was not originally what Monopoly was intended to do. Monopoly's original creator, the person who created the Landlord's game, which is what the original game was, Lizzie Magie in 1904. She was a Georgian, kind of a school of economic thought that was all single tax. There's a whole sidebar down there. That is a rabbit hole we do not want to go down. The whole idea, though, is during the Industrial Revolution, it was kind of formed in the same kind of intellectual cauldron that created Marxism, that created different schools of economic thought. Modern capitalism was created there, modern socialism, modern communism. All of those things were kind of created during that era. Georgian is one of the less well-known of those. It basically advocates single tax. So basically, the only thing that was taxed was land, and your labor was not taxed. There's a whole school of thought on that. There are people I know who are listening who are like, but, we're not going to go down that road. It's not worth it. She made the game. Her contribution to the game, or to her field, was the game. There weren't as many options for women to contribute to economics in those days. So she wanted to say, well, I'm going to create a game that parents can play with their kids, and it will help teach them kind of the evils of rent and the evils of exploitation, yada, yada, yada. And through that, they will learn. She actually received her first patent before she could vote in the United States.
Wow.
Which is kind of an amazing story. For those of you watching and not listening, right behind me, right there, is the original patent for the Landlord's game, which you can find. And you will recognize Monopoly almost immediately, but there are a number of different changes. We kind of fast forward to the 1930s, and the game had been kind of on college campuses. It had been copied, kind of like a game of telephone. No one really knew where it came from. There's no patent search database you could go and see, hey, is this copyrighted or patented? So Charles Darrow, the story many people more will know is that Charles Darrow invented Monopoly. Well, there's a distinction we'll get into on kind of the difference between inventing and innovating that we'll talk about in a second. But basically what he did is he took this kind of messed up, ugly, hand-drawn, sketched game. It had some promise, but it needed zhuzh. It needed color, it needed characters.
Atlantic City.
It needed like that. Actually, he didn't do.
Oh, really?
He got the game. The version that he found, the original, was all New York, like Wall Street, Broadway, those sort of things. When it got to the Quakers, created a version of the game with Atlantic City stuff, like Boardwalk, Park Place, those sorts of things. And it's one of the ways we know is that he copied it because there was a mistake for Marvin Gardens versus Marvin Gardens. That's the mistake that shows that, yes, he did copy it from them. So we know that. And there's some great Tom Forsyth has a whole website. So if you go to landlordsgame.info or something, there's a whole like primary source archive of all this stuff, which is just fascinating. What he did though, Charles Darrow and his wife Esther, they commercialized it. They created a nicer version. They hired illustrators to kind of make it nicer. And when they were turned down by Parker Brothers, because he was turned down twice, he created enough games and sold them himself at FAO Schwartz. So he sold the games, and FAO Schwartz, they had such a big win that Christmas season that Parker Brothers went back to Darrow's and said, okay, we're ready to buy. So they gave him, they bought the rights to the game and a percentage of every game sold.
Oh, wow.
So, he made bank. I mean, he became wealthy overnight. And there's an interesting story about Darrow. People look at that and they're like, well, there was an article in the Atlantic. I think it was the Atlantic. I don't have the article, my own work in front of me right now here. But the title of the article was "An Anti-Capitalist Woman Invented Monopoly and a Man Got All the Credit," which is a wonderful way to kind of tell half the story. And part of that, I would say, is the difference between invention and innovation. Mm-hmm. Invention is creating an idea. Most people don't know that like 80% of patents are never used. Like if you go to the US Patent and Trademark Database and you look at all the patents, most of them are dead, or they have never been used. They've never been used for anything. It's not to say that ideas are cheap. They're not cheap, but good ideas are really hard. Mm-hmm. Most ideas are not good. Even if they're unique, that doesn't make them good. The second part, innovation, is all about the getting someone to adopt it, buy it, vote for it, adopt the idea. So just because you have an idea doesn't mean anyone else will care. So, when you invent a new product, if you can't sell it to anybody, or if you have a new idea and you can't get anyone to adopt that idea, you have an invention, you don't have an innovation. Lizzie Magie invented, Charles Darrow innovated. They both are important, but they're not the same thing. And kind of an interesting coda to the story, there are two interesting points of context that are important in that story. One, people say, well, hey, Lizzie Magie got nothing out of this deal with Parker Brothers. They kind of worked her over. Not true, actually. Parker Brothers not only paid her because they realized that Charles Darrow's story about being a sole inventor was complete bunk. Like their legal team saw through that immediately. So they actually gave her money, not quite as much as he got, but she did get money. But she also Parker Brothers published 2 of her games. So she wanted, remember, that's what she wanted. She wanted to get those games out in the world. They published 2 of her games. They didn't do super well, but she had Parker Brothers publish 2 of the games. So she did okay. And Charles Darrow, people think, well, gosh, what a prick. That's mean. Well, to kind of understand where he was coming from, he had one of his boys got scarlet fever and got brain damage from scarlet fever before antibiotics. So he was a special needs kid at home. So his wife couldn't work. He was out of work. And there was no care for his son. He was desperate to find something that would work. And he worked this thing. He did anything he could to make sure that this would work because he had to. Does it make what he did right? Does it make what she did right? Is everything fair? Is everything great? Well, no, we can debate all that. But understanding all of the moving parts, I think, helps people put that sort of thing into context. That, okay, history isn't as clear cut as a narrative we might want to kind of paste on top of it later. And we need to be really careful. And this is one of those stories in the book where we need to be very careful about our priors when we come in. Mm-hmm. What is our perspective? What are we looking for? What facts are we bringing into our history? And which ones are we conveniently leaving out? And I think this is a great, I don't really get into, I never use the word historiography in my book. Uh, but that's
Lynn
what we're
tells me
talking
not
about.
to, because normal people apparently think it's too, like it's like saying Voldemort to
Yeah, no,
like an average human.
topic
Apparently,
which shall not be named.
yeah,
This is truth. So I think it's a fascinating story, and there's so many like that. That's one of the things I love about doing this type of work, is that you really understand what really happened. Not just the story, or hey, whatever narrative that will get clicks today. Because when, again, my prior is that I want to help people really innovate and bring something into the world. And in order to do that, I need to help them understand that this is not kind of an A to B to C sort of thing. This is messy, it's human. There's sometimes no right answers. Sometimes it's all bad guys.
Isn't it unfortunate how it works out that way sometimes?
Well, that's life.
This has been so interesting, and time has flown by. So we only have a few minutes left, but can you tell our listeners some of the other topics that you cover? Because they're so interesting, and there will be something for everybody. So can you just give us an idea of some of the other topics, the other people, the other objects that are created in your book?
Yes, I think there will be something for everyone. That's kind of when I say tapas history. That's sort of what
Mhm.
I mean. Like, if you go in and you order the sea bass and you don't like sea bass, you're in a lot of trouble. You're going to go away hungry. But part of my heritage is from Barcelona, and we had tapas. That's part of
Mhm.
the
Sure.
wonderful idea. So there is something for everything. The book is organized into three major sections. One is products, entertainment, and heroes. So, kind of the products we chose to buy, the entertainment we consumed, and the people we elevated as heroes. So, those are the three big sections. So, kind of in products, we get Scotch tape, color photography, bullfrog farming, what gives the book its name.
Mhm.
Bullfrogs, bingo, which is in the entertainment section. So along with Monopoly, you get bingo and King Kong, and mini golf and skiing, Ripley's Believe It or Not, Snow White. So all of those sorts of stories that you may have heard of. Some of my personal favorites are uh, dog food.
Yes.
One of my that's you'll love it if you're a pet lover. You buy the
Mhm.
book just for
Yep.
that chapter, and why pets were so psychologically important during the Great Depression. It's just a really heartwarming story. We also get the first antibiotics. They're sulfa, not penicillin.
Mhm.
So you may still there are still things that people get treated with sulfa drugs. Those were invented during that time. But we get Elliot Ness. We referred to him before. Superman dates from the 1930s. So if you're a comic book aficionado, people all know about Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who created Superman. But we get heroes like Pancho Barnes, the female aviator you haven't heard of, who was in so many ways more of a hero than Amelia Earhart, and had a huge influence on the space race and test flights during that time. Uh, we do talk uncomfortably about Father Coughlin. He's in the book. That's an uncomfortable chapter. It is towards the end, but don't skip it, kids. You got to learn that one.
Mhm.
But Little House on the Prairie, of course, and kind of the whole idea behind Little House on the Prairie, about kind of the libertarian ethos that came from there. And finally, the last chapter is on Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers,
Mm.
which is a great story that not just talks about them as a pair, but also what it told us about kind of the relationship between men and women, husbands and wives during that time, which is really it's a wonderful capstone, to it. So again, from everything I've talked about, like, come on, you'll find something in there, and something in there for 30 minutes on the treadmill that you really enjoy. I
Yeah.
promise.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, it's definitely intriguing. I'm eagerly awaiting the audiobook because I may not do 30 minutes on the treadmill every day, but I do spend 30 minutes in the car most days.
Yeah,
So,
most people do. Yeah, same. It's kind of a commute, a treadmill, a walk
Mm-hmm.
outside, whatever works for you.
yeah, it's perfectly situated. And the name of the book is called Bullfrogs, Bingos, and Little House on the Prairie: How Innovators of the Great Depression Made the Best of the Worst Times, by Jason Voiovich. And it comes out on May 13th. Are there is there a pre-release, or is there a date that people should look forward for pre-orders?
Yeah, there'll be a pre-order mid-April for sure. I'm thinking around
Okay.
tax day. I'll put the pre-order out there. There's no, nothing more, nothing symbolic about that. I hope there's nothing symbolic about that. But yeah, that's about a month before, and the coaches that be tell me that don't do the pre-order too early.
Sure.
Uh, the best place to find that, obviously, on Amazon. You can
Mm-hmm.
find the prior book on the 1920s. It's kind of a precursor to this one, but uh, I would invite people, if they want to kind of keep up on that, subscribe to Innovation History on Substack. And that's where you'll find updates on the book and other writing that doesn't quite make it into a kind of a collection like this. It's a little bit more of, kind of me experimenting with different things, different primary sources I got in the mail, or an archive I went to, or something about where I live in Florida now, which is no end of weirdness, by the way, which is a lot of fun too. So would be the best place to find me, is on Substack.
That's great. And we will have links to all that stuff in the description. And if you're listening
Mm-hmm.
to or watching this after the pre-release or the release of the book, we will also have a link to the book, or where you can order the book, in the description as well. And as always, this conversation was brought to you by our supporters over on Patreon. So if you feel so inclined and enjoyed what you heard, check out patreon.com/primary source media, where you can get early access to a bunch of our content, a little BTS stuff, and then some exclusive stuff that's coming down our pipeline. So we got some exciting stuff over there for our Patreon supporters. And I am Isaac S. Loftus, as always, joined by my co-host, Dr. Lynn Price Robbins.
Yes.
And thank you, Jason.
Thank
No,
you
I
so
appreciate
much.
it. Thank you so much for having me. And I will watch that first Monopoly game. We have got everyone listening. We have got to get to 100 likes. I am
100
putting out the
likes.
word on Substack. You're getting those 100 likes. You're getting a game.
Well, and we'll have to live stream it because these are some competitive people we have in primary source media.
Now, the issue is that this will take some logistics because we are in different states. No
Right.
two people in
There's
our company
online
live together.
versions. You can play I will count the online version of the
Okay,
game.
I was thinking we should all get 4 different boards
Oh, that could be good too.
and then mirror them as we're
I like
playing.
that idea too.
But we
Yeah,
could
that's
do the
really
digital version
cool.
as well to make it a little bit easier. But I'm very much looking forward to it.
Oh, that sounds like a blast. Thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak with your listeners. I think they're really going to like this. I think, if anything, what I want to leave people with is that as things get stressful, just this is a book that is about hope. And it is about, like, we got this. Like, as bad as things get, we will find a way to make it better on the other side. I promise you. And by the time you finish reading the book, you will be convinced.
Well, I can't
Oh,
figure out a
thank
better way to leave
you.
it.
I
Thank
know.
you.
That's perfect.